Hey, this is Steve Bloom, and you are listening to the Geekcast Radio Network.
Welcome to The Pullbag. Join us as we dig out our latest comics and discuss them with the rotating panel of the GCRN crew. So sit back and enjoy this week's Pullbag.
Hey, bub, I keep telling you, don't call me Wolfie! Snicked.
Hello and welcome to The Pullbag. This is episode 5. I am one of your hosts, Steve, joined by again. Joining me once again is JT from Saskatoon. Hello.
And how are you today?
I'm pretty good. You're tired, aren't you?
I am always tired.
Sick and tired of this world. We are continuing our Origins series here in the Pullbag, where this is more so going to be me interviewing you about your comic history. Back in episode 3 of the Pullbag, Steve and I kind of basically just talked our history out. So since my story is kind of already out there on the podcast, this is going to be more interview style with you. At what age did you get into comics?
Pretty much from the get-go, I would say, just like once I learned how to read. Originally, I would imagine my mom and my dad started feeding me like Richie Rich and Archie, such like that. Because I can remember like growing up, I'd go and visit my grandma in my hometown of McNutt, and she always had like these grocery bags full of like Archie and Richie Rich comics that I would just read over and over again ad infinitum, because I just loved reading comics growing up. The color, the story, it was just something that I did. I never really gave much thought about why as a kid anyhow,
Yeah.
And from there it just kind of, almost took on a life of its own in a way. I started reading Archie and Richie Rich, and eventually, once I found other stuff like Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, I just kind of, if it was a comic book, I'd give it a try, and never really did stray too far from superhero comics, but, that's kind of the foundation, I learned how to reading comics as a small child.
Right. What were some of the books that you were reading as a kid? Like by the time you were like 7, 8, and when you were younger.
Yeah. Well, Spider-Man definitely, because like I said in, the Superior Spider-Man episode, he's like my all-time favorite comic book character because, I grew up watching the old 1960s Spider-Man cartoon, which is still one of my favorite Spider-Man animated series. And it's just like, there's a comic book, like, hell yes. But, Spider-Man, Batman definitely influenced that because I used to watch the old Adam West show growing up. I remember reading team books back in the day. Like, that's always been a big thing for me. I've always loved reading team books. And I know as a kid, like my dad, my grandma on my dad's side, my grandma Elizabeth, had like these 2 boxes full of what comics remained from when my dad was a kid growing up and reading comics. Like he still had the covers on them with the old ink pad stamp from the drugstore that he bought them from in my other, hometown of Yorkton, which is like the closest city to where we lived here in Canada. And so, Justice League, Avengers, didn't really get into X-Men until I got, into junior high and the cartoon was out.
Yeah.
So basically the big 3 would have been like, Spider-Man, Batman, Superman definitely, and basically there was any number of teen books that I read, like Freedom Fighters, Justice League, Avengers, West Coast Avengers, stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Now, what would you say are, like, by the time you get into, like, high school and stuff, what was that kind of, like, had your taste changed, or did you gravitate between companies, or were you all, because you seem to be like, oh, I like everything, I'm not just a Marvel guy, I'm both. But, was there a time where it basically, you were like, I don't care about what Marvel's doing. I'm gonna go read DC for the next year and a year and a half, or whatever.
Well, stuff like that. Some friends of mine, even today, like bug me about, like, I've always been a DC fanboy and a member of the Merry Marvel Marching Society. Like, I've never, it's kind of like when we did in the GCRN Music Spotlight, how I, as there's stuff that I like and I'll always like Nickelback and, Our Lady Peace and stuff like that. Like, I just read something, I like it, whether it comes from one company or another. I never, it's almost like a system of political thought. Like, I've never picked a side.
Yeah.
I've cherry picked. I've read everything, a lot of stuff from DC, a lot of stuff from Marvel. I mean, back in high school, I read stuff from Image. I read stuff from, what would be considered independent companies like Malibu Comics that, gave us stuff like, that spun into Ultraverse comics like Prime and Hard Case, which at least in the 90s came very close to, I wouldn't say neck and neck, but definitely given some competition to the big, two.
Yeah.
I mean, specifically by high school, I was definitely way into X-Men because of the cartoon, and also because the idea in X-Men, the whole idea of hating someone because they're different. I mean, literally comic books really shaped a lot about me, like the whole, concepts of right and wrong and, responsibility, like from Spider-Man and X-Men, which is kind of a racial tale because, humans hate mutants because they have powers and they're different. And I never got that concept, like why hate someone because they're different. So I was way into X-Men because of that. And I remember in high school, junior high and high school, I was also way into this line of comics. It was called Impact Comics from DC, which is basically a 90s remake of the old, like, The Shield, The Fly, The Jaguar. These old kind of, basically, they were published by Archie Comics under the Blue Ribbon Comics label back in the day. It was another line of superhero comics. And a lot of the short-lived stuff that came out in the 90s like that, the Ultraverse comics, like I said, like Prime, Hard Case, and the Freaks, the Nightman. If it was a superhero comic, I pretty much read it. Hell, I even read a comic that was called The X-Mutants, which, and it sounds exactly, it was basically exactly what it sounds. And this one was even a remake of the original title from like an independent comic in the 80s about, it's hundreds of years in the future after nuclear apocalypse, and there's these group of mutants who are discovered by this scientist who's in like this robotic body, and he uses his magic science to turn them into full humans, so they're not walking around with like all, the bumps and the boils and everything. And it's kind of like a post-apocalyptic superhero story, because now these guys are the freaks among the freaks because they're, normal. And I think that's another reason why I got into that, like X-Men. It's like the whole idea of, what is normal, what is different. Anything like that I really got into. And it grew from there, really, as I went through high school. Like, I dipped into everything. I think, and especially in high school, the one thing that really got me, it really, by high school, I really kind of solidified my taste as to, if it's a crossover, I better be into the story before I get into it.
Exactly. You have to start
You,
at issue. Whenever a crossover happens, you have to start at that first issue. You can't start in the middle of it.
well, yeah, that exactly. But it was more so the storyline, because, I loved reading crossovers growing up. There's stuff like, Acts of Vengeance, which was basically Loki, the Norse god of mischief, teaming up with, like, Doctor Doom, the Red Skull, Kingpin, Mandarin, and these villains would go after other heroes that weren't their normal enemies. They had stuff like that, which was, like, a cool enough story. Or there's even kind of a crossover without actually being a crossover. I remember Amazing Spider-Man, that, and especially in the 90s, when an artist named Mark Bagley, who him and Brian Michael Bendis had, basically they now have the longest on continuous run in a Marvel comic book series. They've broken, I forget the exact number of issues, but they broke the original title held by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee on Fantastic Four with the Ultimate Spider-Man title. And Mark Bagley's been one of those guys, like, he's got this very clean style, like, it's very dynamic and full-bodied, but it's not, like, so cluttered, and it doesn't look, it's very smooth and good-looking. But there was this crossover where it's like Spider-Man teams up with Nova the Human Rocket, the Punisher, Night Thrasher, the New Warriors, Moon Knight, to fight the Secret Empire, which is one of the dozens of secret societies dedicated to world domination that you find in the Marvel Universe. And it all happened in this about 4 or 5 issues of just Amazing Spider-Man. So, and I got into that because I was reading I was reading Nova and the New Warriors comics and getting way into Punisher in high school. And it's stuff like that if I dig it, I'll get into it wholesale.
Mm-hmm.
But there were so many crossovers in the 90s. Like, there's company-wide crossovers. There was, a family of title crossovers. There'd be, like, stuff that crosses over all the X-Men books or all the Superman books. And if I didn't, like you said, if you're going to get into it, I get into it in the first issue if I want to, and I go hard. But aside from that, I really got picky. Like, I really refined my tastes as to what I wanted to read by high school.
Right. I remember I think the only crossover I've ever read, like company crossover, not necessarily, because obviously Death of the Family just ended, and we'll get into we'll get into what you read today in a little bit, but obviously Death of the Family just ended in the New 52, and that was a crossover amongst all the different Bat books. But as far as company crossovers, I think the only one I've ever read was the 90s DC versus Marvel, that 4-issue.
Oh, yeah. That's I love the DC versus Marvel crossover, but speaking of a Batman crossover, one of my all-time favorite, like, just family title crossovers was, like, Nightfall, Nightrise, and Night's End, which is the whole kind of trilogy of storylines where you introduce the character of Bane, and
yeah.
you see him and basically track and then break the Batman, and then you get this new character that they introduced named Jean-Paul Valier, Azrael, who's this assassin for this secretive religious sect, and he becomes the new Batman. First he's wearing the normal costume, and then his, like, hypnotic programming starts to break his mind, and he gets, like, these funky, like, taloned gauntlets that he can fire Batman shuriken out of, and eventually he gets, like, a bad 90s update costume with the one wrap of pockets or, like, pouches around his thigh, and then it just, like, updates for, because it was the 90s and everyone had to be fresh and new and hip, and by the end of it, Bruce Wayne came back, whooped some ass, and proved why he is the goddamn Batman. But no, DC Marvel, see, that's the thing I love about DC Marvel. Intercompany crossovers, if they're done well, it's a matter of taste as how well they're done. One of the things I loved about comics in the 90s is that was kind of the last era, the last decade where they were just plain fun in a way for me. Like, a lot of crossovers, they didn't necessarily make sense. Like, there was a crossover called Blood Ties where it was, Magneto was causing shit and the X-Men and the Avengers team up to, smack him around. But I mean, even for yourself, like DC Marvel, that was like the Aliens versus Predator, the Godzilla versus King Kong, sort of team up. And it was a decent concept. There's these giant cosmic beings. There's one red, one blue, one's Marvel, one's DC. Random characters are meeting. I mean, you don't get, like, full issue fights. They're done pretty quickly, but they're pretty well matched up. I mean, Lobo versus Wolverine, Thor versus Wonder Woman, or is it, stuff like that. Green Lantern versus the Silver Surfer. They're pretty close matched up. And the result of that after the 3rd issue, I mean, fans could call in and vote on a 1-800 number as to who's going to win a fight. So Hulk versus Superman. I believe Superman won that, but pretty much by giving the Hulk a hot seat. I haven't read it in so long. I might be getting that wrong, But after the third issue, what they had is the brothers combine, and you got this what's called a fifth week event, which is a special event comic that's published kind of outside the normal storytelling structure of a series or a company. And you had this line called Amalgam Comics, where it was basically, you take Captain America and Superman, you get Super Soldier, Wolverine and Batman becomes Dark Claw. One of my personal favorites in the combo, it was called The Challengers of the Fantastic. It was this old comic book created by Jack Kirby called The Challengers of the Unknown, combined with the Fantastic Four. And it's just stuff like that. It's just like bat poop insane ideas that were just fun. Because if you start thinking about comic books too much in the long run, well, nothing really makes sense. Like, why does Spider-Man get superpowers? Why doesn't he die of radiation sickness? How does Batman not run his company into the ground, stealing all this money to make all his bat gear? So, yeah.
Yeah, you got to think with Batman, though, with Bruce Wayne, he's a billionaire. Today you see, Avengers made $1 billion. When I think of Bruce Wayne, I think of a billionaire where he has billions of dollars, he's not just, like, he continues to make deals. He continues to find ways for technology to make him money. I think of Bruce Wayne like people think of royalty checks.
Yeah.
Anytime your cartoon airs or rerun on TV, someone somewhere is getting a royalty check.
Yeah, you're getting a little bit of something.
Yeah.
No, I remember, at least in the previous continuity of DC, because if we start talking about the New 52, I'll start screaming the word.
We'll get into that in a second.
Well, I'll try not to. I'll refrain from screaming the F word for 5 minutes straight. But they used to publish these comics which called Secret Files and Origins, which has been a concept in DC Comics since the 60s. But in the 90s, the Secret Files and Origins specials more or less replaced what was the annual comic books that come out, which were the oversized with like special stories or tie into an ongoing storyline or something like that. And they had this like 2 or 3 page story where Lucius Fox is presenting Bruce Wayne with a shrinkage inventory, which is basically a list of all the stuff that Batman has stolen from his company over the years that are just made disappear. So there's stuff like a Hercules C-130 transport plane that took off from Gotham Airport and never made it to New York. Like a whole bank of crazed supercomputers, and you see Robin like wiring stuff together. A McLaren racing engine. You see Batman and Robin in the Harold the Hunchback, who was a character in the 90s Batman comics that, kind of explain, well, how does Batman keep all his, cars in good repair? Well, it's not just Alfred. And it's stuff like that I love. Like, yeah, Batman, he's making enough money to cover it, but damn, he's almost embezzling half the time.
And on that note, we're going to hear something from Wolverine, and we'll be back after this.
Come here. I'm the best there is at what I do, and what I do can't be imitated, copied, cloned, or used without the express written permission of the Superhero Squad and Marvel Entertainment, LLC. Batteries not included. All rights reserved. Terms, conditions, restrictions apply. We clear, bub.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Wolverine, for letting us know who you are. And that there is no substitute. So, okay, here in the pull bag, we will be doing eventual episodes about DC pre and post New 52. We will also be doing an episode, Marvel Then, Marvel Now, talking about Marvel before their quote-unquote New 52 relaunch. But what are you, as an adult, what are you reading these days? We know, obviously, you're reading Superior Spider-Man, but what else are you reading in comics today?
Well, in Marvel, right now, I'm reading Superior Spider-Man. Still reading, like, some of the core titles, like Avengers, Uncanny Avengers, Wolverine and the X-Men, the new Uncanny X-Men, which they've restarted for, like, the 4th time in the last 3 years. Iron Man, I think I said, reading the new Thunderbolts, which is a title I've basically read since it came out in the mid-90s is one of the titles that started post-Onslaught. which was, I don't know if you've ever read Thunderbolts, have you, Mike?
Nope.
Okay. It's basically, the original title was this new group of heroes that debuted after, the Avengers and the Fantastic Four were thought to have died fighting Onslaught, which was like this psychic demon that was like a combination of the worst parts of Magneto and Professor X. And
Jeez.
the concept is a decent idea. The execution was a little flawed. And that's not to say that it was like so bad. It was definitely flawed, but it wasn't, horrible either. And then the Thunderbolt, by the end of the first issue, you see that you got these new guys. There's a Citizen V, which is an update character of an actual Golden Age, Timely Comics character, which is the company that preceded Marvel. And there's, Citizen V, Techno with his, cybernetic backpack, Moonstone, Songbird, Mach 1, and Atlas. And by the end of the first issue, you find it basically it's Baron Zemo and the Masters of Evil disguised as good guys. And, Zemo, this is Zemo Jr., not the original guy that had his hood glued to his face. And that's the actual character. He's a Nazi scientist who had adhesive X. And Captain America threw his mighty shield, and Baron Zemo had a hood glued to his face for the rest of his days. So by the end of it, it's the Masters of Evil basically working on this plan for world domination. And eventually they're joined by this new girl named Jolt, who's got like these bioelectric powers. And eventually they're revealed as villains, and a bunch of them. It basically became this idea of like villains seeking redemption for the longest time. And up until the current storyline where it's the Red Hulk, who I called it. I mean, if you haven't read the storyline yet, spoilers, I'm sorry, but it was General Ross the whole time. Yeah, General Ross became that which he hated most. I mean, duh, it's comics. They're not really big on originality in some respects. But anyway, I read Thunderbolts. You cross over to DC. On my podcast that, it's kind of been on indefinite hiatus for a while, we had an episode which is not me and my co-host Doug screaming the word fuck for an hour. I'm still against the idea of the DC New 52, just the idea. It's just, I think it was a lazy idea. It's like, oh, we want to bring on new writers. Yeah, so the writers or new readers, so the writers should actually make an effort and write decent stories that'll bring in new people. No, let's just chuck like 30 years of continuity because we're too tired of doing our homework.
30 years, more like 70 years.
Well, no, 30 years from like basically 1985, they had the crossover Crisis on Infinite Earths, which was the result of basically by that point, the World War II heroes were on Earth 2, and Captain Marvel and the Marvel family were on Earth S, and Captain Carrot and his amazing zoo crew on Earth, Googleplex or whatever. So that was an editorial decision, as the whole crossover storyline brought every character that DC was currently publishing or had in their library and consolidated it into one storyline, one timeline. So basically from 1985 onward, it was a whole new deal. And by the time they did, the new like Flashpoint and they rebooted the universes, Dan DiDio and the other editors were like, well, we got to bring in new readers. Well, hell, let's just start over again. So I'm against the idea. I'm not, and I will always kind of be against it, but there have been some pretty cool stories that have come out of the New 52. I mean, not everything has been gold.
Well, all right. So, as people already know, and I'm, this is more about you than me, but they did New 52, but because there were already storylines in place, they don't.
Well, yeah. See, that's
no. Hold on. Because there were storylines that people had worked on for a year prior, they don't reboot Batman and/or Green Lantern. And because I am the only DC books that I read pretty much are any of the I read Batman, Batgirl, Nightwing. Those are the main three, and then sometimes I will pick up Batman and Robin. Now that, of course, spoilers, Damian is dead. Thank fucking God. I hate that fucking kid so much. I'll probably be reading that a little bit more, but um, are you reading anything? Like, do you like anything from the New 52?
Well, no, there is a lot of titles that I like in New 50, and I agree with you. My biggest sticking point with the whole reboot, if you're going to reboot your entire universe, reboot your entire universe. Don't stop at two characters just because you've been doing this for, it bothers me, is what I'm saying with Green Lantern. And, like, it's not that I don't enjoy the Green Lantern storylines, which is one of the titles that I still collect from DC. It's just the logic of it irks me. But I mean, in DC, I'm still a huge Justice League fanboy, so I'm getting both Justice League titles, like JLA, or Justice League and Justice League of America just started coming out. I've been getting Batman pretty much since the beginning. I've been getting Green Lantern. I've kind of been cherry picking some of the other Lantern titles because of the crossover or the ongoing storyline that's going on right now. Like, yeah, the Guardians go mental and create these zombie like creatures called the Third Army to wipe out the Green Lantern Corps and start over because emotion is the enemy. One of the titles from DC that I've really been digging is, unfortunately, it's they've gone in waves and canceling low selling titles and bringing new stuff on. So it just was announced it's going to be canceled after the next couple issues. Is DC Comic Presents, which is basically a title where they brought back characters and concepts in a new 52 origin. So stuff like the Challengers of the Unknown, Blue Devil and Black Lightning. They changed the origin there. The concept of Vandal Savage that's been introduced in the new 52 is kind of cool, where he's kind of this Hannibal Lecter-ish type of villain, but his daughter is like an FBI profiler and has to not break him, but takes him out of prison to have him help track down this copycat serial killers. I mean, that was a cool story. The titles that I've really kind of been getting into is the old Wildstorm / Image titles that Jim Lee's brought into DC. Because I mean, it was years ago in the mid to late '90s where Jim Lee kind of seceded from Image Comics, and Wildstorm Comics, it was his own universe, and then he famously kind of sold it to DC, and it was folded into the DC media umbrella, but the characters never crossed over very often with the normal DC universe. But in the new 52, now that he's like one of the main editors and kind of one of those guys in creative control, they've been filtering in concepts from Image Comics like Team 7, Grifter, Voodoo. I mean, and they're slowly, and I love a slow burn story, but sometimes it's maddening because I love the characters so much, and the idea that they're very slowly building towards the debut of the Wildcats, which is a comic book that I've always loved. Like, I wish I could find the crappy 90s cartoon series on DVD because I love that show. And because the Wildcats, for those that never read it, is basically this title. There's this alien Cold War on Earth, and there's the alien Daemonites who can like possess people, and they've got all sorts of weird powers, and they're trying to take over the world, and they're opposed by the Wildcats, or the Wild Covert Action Team. But with a name like that, doesn't really sound like they're going to be under wraps too much. And they're made up of like aliens and cyborgs, and it's such a 90s concept, but I loved it. So I mean, they're building towards that. They've also had a couple of miniseries involving characters like the Ray, Phantom Lady and Dollman, and the Human Bomb, and these are all characters from another one of the teen books I loved growing up called the Freedom Fighters, like Uncle Sam and the Freedom Fighters. And there's been other stuff. I was reading Catwoman for a while, and I kind of dropped out of that. Was reading Firestorm. Firestorm's the character. I stopped getting the regular titles. Like, there are certain comic books, and this is across a lot of different companies that I read. There are certain titles that I can't do single serving portions. I got to go buffet on them, if you get my meaning.
So basically, you don't collect certain titles. You don't collect single issues. You wait for the trades.
Yeah, like Firestorm. I read probably most of the first year, and Firestorm's always been a character I always kind of dug. Like, visually, I love the costume and the whole, split personality sort of thing I dug. But yeah, with the new Firestorm, I've just been picking up the trades. And once you get out of Marvel and DC, I'm kind of a little over the map with all the other companies. Like IDW's got the license for Ghostbusters, Transformers, and GI Joe. So I've been getting pretty much all of those comics. There's stuff from like Top Cow. Like I still get pick up again. I pick up the trades of Witchblade when they come out every so often because I've always loved the Witchblade comic. I mean, yeah, like most guys who started reading in the 90s, it's like, pretty lady, not a lot of clothes, you know. But
It was even better in 2001 when Yancey Butler actually played her on TV, because holy crap. But
yeah,
anyway.
yeah, but they never did like the comic book version of the costume. Is always like an actual suit of armor. But no, it was a great show,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong. So I've been collecting that. Robert Kirkman, who's kind of the way he's become an Image partner. You know, he's kind of grandfathered in, kind of the way Captain America was given founder status in the Avengers, even though he was not there until a few weeks later. He's a guy, I love the Walking Dead comic. I love the TV show. I mean, go for him. He's kind of created his own superhero universe within Image Comics, and with stuff like Invincible, which is basically the son of Superman sort of story. This guy Mark.
It's a clone!
There are clones, but it starts simply enough. It starts off as this, this kid finds out he's basically the son of Superman. It goes from there. He had this comic book ran for a couple of years that I absolutely loved. It was called The Astonishing Wolfman, about this rich guy who he gets attacked by a werewolf, and then this vampire trains him how to use his powers to fight for good. And there's a whole flip side to why the vampire's training him. I mean, it was just a goofy concept. It's a werewolf superhero. That's awesome. But he also writes one of my current favorite titles. It's called Super Dinosaur. And it's kind of a little bit of Johnny Quest mixed a little bit of like Power Rangers, about this kid, Derek, and his father used to team with this other scientist named, Darius Dark or something like that. And basically they find this new element that they call Dynor, and they use it for all these weird and cool scientific applications. And then the evil scientist creates a intelligent talking Tyrannosaurus Rex, who's about 12 years old mentally, becomes best friends with Derek, and eventually Derek, Super D, and his dad, they go off and they fight the evil scientist. And it's very Johnny Quest, but I love the fact that when they're not fighting, like the design of the character is cool, because it's Super Dinosaur goes into battle with like this super harness that's got like rocket launchers and laser cannons, and it's basically everything that a 10-year-old boy would want his pet dinosaur to have.
But it doesn't transform, so it's not
Oh,
Grimlock.
no, it's not Grimlock, but I mean, it's so, I don't know if he wants to make toys out of this, but it would be so cool if he did just buy the different harnesses to put on a Super Dinosaur toy, because he's got like combat armor, he's got flight armor, he's got undersea armor. It's kind of like the Batman aesthetic, but it actually happens in the comics.
So wait a second. This T-Rex is essentially, it's not Grimlock because it doesn't transform, yet it's Iron Man because it has all these different armors.
Damn right. Like the first storyline in the comic, he's got like his standard armor, and he's got like this little belt that you see his little T-Rex hands, working, looks like arcade style joysticks to, work everything. And the end of the first major story arc, the evil scientist, like I'm maddening, I can't remember his name right now, unleashes a giant velociraptor on our heroes. So Super D gets this huge version of his armor, and it's just one of those things. Is like, you know what? I don't even care if logic doesn't make sense. This is fucking awesome. But I mean, all those, one of my favorite comics and it comes in two comics. My two absolute favorite comics right now. Sadly, one of them's coming to an end. It's a comic called Hack Slash, which I grew up loving, watching 80s slasher movies, like horror movies like Freddy, Jason, Michael Myers, Leatherface. And the idea is, in this comic, there's always that one girl that survives a slasher flick. And Hack Slash, it's this character named Cassie Hack, her mother went mad, started killing all the kids that were teasing her daughter in school and cooking them into the mystery meat at lunch. And when Cassie fingered her for all these murders, she threw her head into a pot of gravy and died, but then she came back as a slasher. And then Cassie killed her mother and meets this guy named Vlad, who's he's not mentally retarded, but he's kind of slow. But he's also built like the wrestler Batista. So Cassie, sorry?
Oh, geez.
Yeah. Well, it's just this kind of, it started as a series of miniseries, and it's basically Cassie and Vlad traveling around the country, and they fight different types of slashers. Like, they even run into Chucky. And basically what Tim Seeley, the creator, has done is he created this world where he explains why Chucky and Freddy and Jason, they all exist in the same world. And he builds this mythology that explains why slashers happen. And some of them, it's pretty cool concepts. Like, he creates one slasher called Father Sin, or Father Wrath, who there's this shrewish girl who finds an ancient tome of Jewish magic that she uses to resurrect this this fire and brimstone preacher who was killed by his right hand like altar boy because he got a little touchy feely and he liked to cross dress. And so this basically, she sends this zombie priest out to exact revenge on all the people who ever wronged her. Or you got stuff like this guy who was gassed in a gas chamber in like an animal clinic, and then he comes back as this, shovel wielding slasher, but he can resurrect all the dead and buried animals around this small town. And it's just, you could so make a movie out of stuff like this if you're into the slasher. And it's just, it's coming to an end in the next couple of months, the last couple issues. So, I mean, if you like horror movies from the 80s, you would definitely love this title. And if you love Hellboy, you would also love Atomic Robo. And Atomic Robo is basically, what if Hellboy was a robot? And the idea is that Nikola Tesla, who basically created, alternating current because Thomas Edison was a massive lying prick, at least in the comic universe. He stole, he's basically a patent thief and blamed other people for a lot of his problems. But Atomic Robo is this, Nikola Tesla creates a robot who basically in the 1920s and has gone through, every major event in American history. And it's very much Indiana Jones, Hellboy, a lot of pulp-style action adventure. By the time when it's anything that's set in the modern day, he owns Tesladyne, which is, a company that grew out of Tesla's original company back in the day. And he surrounds himself with what's called action scientists. Mm-hmm. Basically, it's G.I. Joe, but everyone has multiple PhDs, and they fight violent science around the world. The two of the major enemies of Atomic Robo, one is this guy named Helsingard, who's basically a Nazi scientist who has cloned his brain dozens of times and has caches of these brains floating in tanks and secret safe houses around the world. So when one dies, another wakes up, screws itself into another robot body, and attempts to take over the world again. And then there's Dr. Dinosaur, a talking super genius velociraptor who is nuttier than a bag full of squirrels, who claims that dinosaurs were intelligent and he comes from the past, and he's going to take over the world with the help of the greatest technology in the land, VHS. It's funny, believe me, I'm kind of rambling here, but I read a lot of comics. It's hard to keep track some days.
Yeah, apparently so.
I know. I hope we still have listeners at this point.
I don't know. I think I kind of checked out after the whole cross-dressing thing.
Yeah, whatever. That's, again, if you like 80s slasher flicks, that's all I'm saying.
Good Lord. Alright, so it's kind of like a final question here. I assume, because I know I haven't read them all, because obviously I'm just getting back into comics since October of last year. I assume you've read all the must-read works, right? Like Dark Knight Returns and...
I've read Dark Knight Returns. The Dark Knight Strikes Again should be burned. because I think that's where Frank Miller lost it. Like, I know the guy kind of learned at the foot of Will Eisner, who's like the godfather of modern comic books and storytelling. But that Spirit movie was just, because I read some of the Spirit comic books. I'm talking the original Will Eisner Spirit comic books, not the crap that Brian Azzarello put out through DC prior to New 52, like the whole Spirit and Doc Savage and such like that. But yeah, no, I read a lot of the seminal works. I mean, stuff like Dark Knight, Crisis on Infinite Earths, Squadron Supreme, if you're into Marvel, is a pretty cool comic book. You know, it's basically Marvel's version of Justice League in a world where they try to fix everything, and it doesn't necessarily work properly. I don't know what else we got.
Let's see. Little thing called Days of Futures Past.
Yeah, no, I read that. I'm a big sucker for, like, with Amalgam Comics now, I'm a big sucker for alternate reality sort of things. Like, if I could have say I have Make You Stupid money and I could buy, like, mint copies of an entire run, I would get the original run of Marvel's What If. Because I've always loved the alternate, like I said, alternate universe tales. So I loved What If, DC's Elseworlds, you know, with the whole concept like that, like Kingdom Come and other stories, you know, stuff like that. Like Marvel's What If, I think probably one of the very first comics I remember buying on my own, like not the stuff that my mom and dad would, hey, you want to get a couple comics, you know, go to the old spinner rack and, you know, grab something. One of the first comics I ever bought with my own money was an issue of What If, wherein it was an oversized special issue where there was 4 vignettes, and it was what if the Fantastic Four all had the same powers. So they had a story where they all get Mr. Fantastic's power, or, you know, the Invisible Woman's, or the Thing. And the Thing one was actually kind of a really tragic tale, because, I mean, they all become like hulking brutes. You know, the Reed turns into, you know, just basically this kind of purple-skinned, you know, behemoth, and he's slowly losing his intelligence, and eventually they end up on Munster Isle and just live out their days there. I mean, Johnny mutates into like the original dinosaur roughhide version of the Thing. Ben Grimm right away mutates into his, like, you know, brick form that we all know and love. Sue Storm got the worst of it. She basically becomes a man thing, just like this big moss-covered Hulk, you know, just no emotion, no intelligence whatsoever. Then the final story is what if they all had the Invisible Woman's powers, and apparently they all become agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and they get captured. It's a story of Captain or Doctor Doom captures them, and they basically take out Doctor Doom and, you know, save the day. But one of my all-time favorite What If tales, and this is one just for the sheer absurdity of it, and this is why I love comics, is there was a storyline in Fantastic Four in the 80s where when John Byrne was writing and doing the story, and it was basically the trial of Galactus. Like, all the races of the universe, you know, put Galactus on trial, and in the What If version of this story, he's sentenced to become human and basically banished into exile on Earth. Except the form that he gets when he lands on Earth is that of Elvis Presley. Sexy, black-suited, jailhouse rock Elvis Presley. He lands in a trailer park outside of Memphis, Tennessee. He is found by an uber Elvis fanatic. He lives with her. He watches all the movies. He watches all the music videos. He listens to all the music. Elvis is back. And this is the best part of the story. He still eats like Fat Elvis. Like, obscene amounts of food. He's just shoveling into his body. And there's like, why do you eat so much? I don't know. I just have this huge gnawing hunger in the pit of my stomach. And I was like, oh my God, this is brilliant. Elvis is Galactus. Galactus is Elvis. Somebody get the fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches.
Alrighty then.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, I've always loved comics. I mean, they're the one art form in the world where you can do stuff like absolutely insane ideas. Like, a guy with buttloads of mommy daddy issues, and he goes around dressed up like a bat and beating people up, and it makes sense. Or you can have a comic book of a bunch of alien robots from another world that transform into planes, trains, and automobiles, and it makes sense. An alien visitor from another planet who gets superpowers because our sun is in a different stage of its life than, the red giant star, which is basically the end life of a star. And he fights crime and fights for truth, justice, and the American way. And it makes sense.
Sometimes it
makes sense. Stuff like 4 baby turtles get covered in glowing radioactive waste and grow up to become butt-kicking ninjas. And it makes sense. How could you not love this stuff?
Yeah. And with that, we're going to go to a quick ad break and come back to close the show after this.
This is 80s action sensation Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I'm here to tell you about the podcast I produced called Punisher Body Count. It's the net's best Punisher podcast. Well, don't take my word for it. Listen to the hosts. Punisher Body Count is
a work in progress.
To listen to this great show, you can find us on iTunes. Just search Punisher Body Count or come to our website, PunisherBodyCount.com.
Coming to Grand Rapids, Michigan on September 21st and 22nd is GrandCon Gaming and Comics Convention, presented by Celebration Cinemas. Join us in playing or chatting it up with fellow enthusiasts in a community that understands your passions. Get lost in the adventure of your favorite role-playing game. Admire costumes and art from vendors and attendees. Meet the creators behind your favorite mainstream and independent games and comic books. Check out unpublished games and sneak peek at things to come. You can get all this and more at GrandCon. For more information, please visit www.grand-con.com.
So let's say you're looking for a podcast of your favorite 80s comic books, G.I. Joe, Transformers, Ninja Turtles, He-Man, etc. Where are you going to go to find us?
Welcome to Star Joe's Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan.
And I'm Chuck. That's right, everybody. We're the Star Joes. We host a podcast called Star Joe's Podcast, where we talk about your favorite comic books, your favorite toys of all the 80s properties.
Star Wars, G.I. Joe, Transformers, Mask, Thundercats, Voltron, you name it, we cover it. If it's in the 80s, we'll cover it at some point.
Yes, so what you want to do to find us, you can go to iTunes, you can go to www.starjoes.com.
And remember, the Force will be with you.
Because knowing us is half the battle.
So we are back here in the pull bag, and that's it. I gotta say,
I read way too many comic books.
Well, yes, you do, but I thought that you were more... I didn't realize you were so off the beaten path and more independent than the big two or ID. Like, I thought you were like into the major franchises, regardless of your feelings of rebooting universes.
Well, no, I mean it's. I used to be. I mean, everything comes and goes. Like I'm still like I said, I'm still way into superhero comics, but I've expanded obviously out of the big two, and there's some for like X-Men. I've always loved X-Men, but in the last few years, it just got to the point where they're canceling X-Men, they're renumbering X-Men, they're splitting up, and Cyclops is going to go live out in this island out in just off the coast of San Francisco, and well, Wolverine and the X-Men brought it back to the whole idea of a school for mutants, and Wolverine is now Professor X, which is like still kind of mind-boggling. Because the best there is at what he does is now a school teacher. But yeah, I know I still love reading superhero comics, but it's in the last few years. A man cannot live on bread alone, basically. So I expanded my tastes, and
well, that's what I'm doing. I since episode 3, since Steve and I told our story, I find myself like I said, okay, I'm only gonna collect these characters. Like when the Iron Man 3 prelude, the 2-issue preludes came out, that leads up into the new movie this year. I was like, okay, I have to get those because I want to see what happens. I'm like, and Steve got me into Batman with Death of the Family with Batman 13. So I'm into Batman. I'm into Batgirl because of that. And I basically pick characters, but since episode 3 of the podcast, I find myself, holy crap, I have to read Rage of the Dinobots. And after the Rage of the Dinobots, this May they're starting Transformers Beast Hunters. And now I have to go back and read stuff before Rage of the Dinobots, which is Transformers Fall of Cybertron 6-issue digital series that's coming out in trade. So I find myself that I just have to keep reading more and more and more and more and more.
Yeah.
Where I find myself where I don't really give a crap is like in Batman Beyond when they do 3 different stories and it's not just a Batman Beyond story. When they do like Justice League Beyond and Superman Beyond, I thought those were their own books. Hopefully they will be getting their own books and get the fuck out of my Batman Beyond.
You got chocolate in my peanut butter.
That's right.
Yeah, no, it's like I said, it's just expand. I mean, there's so many comics that I've seen that I would like to try, but I looked at I go to my comic book store, which is 8th Street Books and Comics here in Saskatoon. I got a hard copy. I got them to print off everything that I got on my pull list right now, and then I'm just like, damn, that's a lot. Like, that's a lot. And stuff like that. So there's be cutting some stuff off here and there. It's a lot of fun. I mean, if I could suggest one title that if you're in DC, if you want to go back and get something, I would suggest the Aquaman comic book. Because
you're just saying that to be a dick, you asshole.
No. And I literally, if you like stuff in DC, it's literally like, I love the fact that I've always kind of thought Aquaman was cool because it's King Arthur under the sea, and he's strong and he can talk to fish, and basically you're gonna mess with a guy that can send a school of sharks and jellyfish after your ass. So stuff like that, and it's just there's so many different things out there. I mean, there's superhero comics, there's comedy comics, there's licensed comics like Transformers and G.I. Joe. There's all sorts of things. They even got stuff like Jim Ballant, who used to do Catwoman back in the day, has got like this sexy witch comic called Tarot, Witch of the Black Rose, that for some reason is immensely popular, although I don't think anyone really reads that for the story. They read it for the art. But because it's, sexy time with witches.
Yes. One final thing. Have you seen the news about what's going to happen in Batman?
Not yet.
You haven't seen the news about issue 21?
No, I haven't.
Wow, you've been living under a rock.
I don't get internet at work, so...
Yeah, okay, well, this shouldn't be a spoiler for the listeners, since everybody should know this by now, but Batman number 21 in the New 52, Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo are doing their second big storyline for this year, and they are doing Batman 0 Year. Basically, this is going to be his New 52 origin, but it's going to be like everybody's done year one. Everyone, well, except for me, because I need to go back and read it, but everyone's read Frank Miller's year one, or not year one. Did he do year one?
He did year one. No, that's a classic Batman story.
Right. Like everybody knows year one. Okay. The point that Snyder made in an interview that I saw online was that no one really knows that first year, or that year, like the build up to him putting the costume on. So that's the next big thing starting in Batman number 21, is that they're going to be doing Batman 0 Year. And I cannot wait. And he said that they're not going to change the origin, they're just going to enhance it and add little things here and there, but they're not going to it's not going to be like, oh, his parents didn't die, they're alive. This is a dream sequence. They're not going to do anything like that, but it's going to be really interesting, and I hope it's a hell of a lot more interesting, and I hope it pays off 10 times more than that sadly anticlimactic ending to Death of the Family.
Yeah, so it's like setting up the cave and such.
Yeah, setting up the cave, building the Batmobile.
Me likey.
The copy on DC's website, and I'll send you the link, is Batman number 21. Witness the new 52 origin of the Dark Knight in Batman Zero Year. Twists and turns around every corner as Bruce Wayne takes the final steps towards his destiny. And in the backup story, learn more about how different Gotham City was at this dangerous point in time. I will see if I can find the actual press release. I think it's on Twitter somewhere. But anyway, yeah, that's going to do it for this episode of The Pull Bag, and I guess we will catch you next time. Keep reading those comics.
You just heard the latest episode of The Pull Bag, GCRN's comic book review podcast. There are several ways to get in touch with us and leave feedback for the show. You can visit the website, geekcastradio.com, where you can comment on the episode and all of our different podcasts. You can rate our show on iTunes. Be sure to leave us feedback. Call the voicemail line, 502-526-5821. Please remember to tell us the show you were leaving the message for, and your name. Become a fan of us on Facebook by searching Geekcast Radio Network. You can send us an email, feedback@geekcastradio.com. Follow us on Twitter, @GeekcastRadio. So until next time, unleash the geek in you.